This is Zettelcast, brought to you by readers, writers, thinkers, and teachers from Lillipub, along with our partners in thought, our Zettelkastens. In this show, we share discoveries that our Zettelkastens have shown us.
There you go.
And compare notes on how we're using this marvelous invention in our creative work. Thank you for joining us.
All right, Brooke. Do it again.
All right.
Episode 10, Ideas that Build Character.
Well, welcome to today's episode of the Zettelcast. Thank you all for returning on this Thanksgiving week. It's a busy week for all of us, I'm sure. I hope everyone is having a great week and has great plans for the coming week. Well, we have a Zettelcast show for you today, which we always do. We love to share our Zettelkasten cards with you and do some activities that let you know both how we use our Zettelkastens and why we think they're so darn much fun. Well, one of the projects that we're doing here in the Zettelcast is we're working on a joint writing project. 5 people and 5 Zettelkastens. We're creating a story, which we're using a working title is the Roanoke Project, because it involves a group of people that were stranded in a given confined area and then disappeared, but they've left behind clues. They've left behind their Zettelkastens. And so it's something of a mystery story. And today's first activity is tangentially related to that story. I'm a character person, you know me. I love the character side of everything. So plot is probably great for other writers, most writers, but for me, it's the characters. And so my activity is getting a little bit to know our characters that we have in mind. The request was that you pull a card from your Zettelkasten that brings to mind a character, and then you explain to us why that card brings that character to mind for you. So who would like to go first in our project?
Okay, I will.
All right.
Oh, ooh, 2 people enter, 1 person leaves. Go ahead, Deb. Go for it.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. All right. So I have sort of 2 answers for this first activity. And the first one is the people on the planet that we now think of as
Lydia.
good try. What? Best try?
Nice try is the name of their
Nice try.
colony. Yeah.
Sorry about that. All right. The point is they were watching Earth for a long, long time. And they noticed that there was this one place that were building Zettelkastens. No place on Earth was doing this activity except the Roanoke colony. And they decided that they wanted to have a working Zettelkasten on their desks too, right? So they were looking over shoulders, kind of virtually trying to figure it out. And they finally came to the conclusion that they couldn't figure it out that way. They had to have a teacher. So they sent an emissary down to Roanoke colony to make a proposal. Hey, one of you guys come and teach us, and this is what we'll give you in exchange. Da-dee-dee-da-dee-dee-da-dee-dee-da. Right? So that's story 1. And the other one is the Time Twins. And the Time Twins are Kairos L or Carousel, right? And a Kairos O. Carousel is a girl, and she represents the cycles that, of life that we all, everything goes through. And Kairos O means opportune. So he's the just in time, oh, I see, and the move, the one who takes advantage of the thing at the exact right time. And so together they are the time twins. So that's my my contribution for the week. Okay.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Deb. Amazing. You always hit the depths. It's just, I don't know how you immediately go deep dive right to the heart of issues and then bring them back up in a manageable number of words. It's astounding.
Well, Mel was the one who put me on this time thing. I went into a deep rabbit hole from last week about time. So thank you, Mel.
Mel should be running around saying, I'm late for a very important date.
With all the
I
rabbit
think
holes
he did that
going
last
down.
week.
Okay. All right. Who is going to be next?
I'll go.
Okay.
Okay, so this is an idea that has kind of percolated ever since we started talking about this. And so for me, the card that I pulled it's from Marshall Branch, which is my main male character in my novel, because in my mind, everything relates back to that work in some way. So if I need to come up with something new or different or need a point of reference, that's always what I spin off of. And something that I wrote for him was he is a collector of artifacts. And I love this idea of having items that somehow inform the place or the people. And so that led me to my bib card for a book by Nick Bantock, which is called Urgent Second Class. It's creating curious collage, dubious documents, and other art from ephemera. So you have things in here like fake postcards, fake passports, collections of fake money. Like everything in here is made up ephemera from places and things that don't exist. So that set me thinking, okay, I love the idea of including an unreliable narrator. So my thought is this narrator, because we know that we have the components of play, informed play and misleading play. So I thought, what if we introduce this person whose job is they are a creator of ephemera. And so our character, let's say Jenna, can find an entry or a note card that's entirely fabricated, but she thinks that it's something that's actually valuable. I just think it could be a fable or a flash story within the story, but something that allows her to discover something she needs to discover, but as a result of an artifact from our unreliable narrator. So that's my thought.
Ooh.
Interesting. Depth there too, of a different kind, depth of the plot.
She's a plotter.
Yeah, very
That's my
much.
job.
Okay, who's next?
Well, I'll go next. Oh, go ahead, Deb.
I'm sorry. Yeah, I have a question. This phrase, unreliable narrator, is that a thing or is something that you created?
That's an actual thing. When you start talking about the points of view of a story, your points of view could be just the actual characters participating in telling the story as they experiment or as they experience it. So that's pretty reliable because you're in their heads, you're seeing things unfold, and you're seeing their reactions authentically in real time. So you're reading that as a reliable story. There is a conceit that takes place both in mass market and literary fiction that's called the unreliable narrator. Now, there are many things that can make them that way. One is the narrator is telling the story, but it includes the blind spots or things that they can't or don't know. And so as the reader, at some point in that story, you're reading along and you're going, wait a minute, this is not what that is. And you realize that the narrator telling the story has misled you, either intentionally, which sometimes happens in a mystery. Maybe the narrator is the villain or the bad guy, and so he's telling the story as if he's the hero from his perspective, and you realize at some point he's completely unreliable because he's trying to make himself look better in the way that he's telling the story.
Yeah.
Or it can be so that can be very directed and on purpose, but it can also be accidental when you find out, maybe, at the end of the first half of the book or the story, you realize that the person telling the story is clinically insane or is institutionalized or is impaired in some way, that you realize, holy cow, this is completely unreliable. And then the reader goes through the exercise of actually figuring out what's going on. So it can be really fun.
Sounds like, okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
All
Who's
right.
going next?
I'll go next.
Okay.
Before I get into my cards, I want to just reminisce for a moment, because Victoria, when you said these made-up ephemera, you reminded me of, I was kind of a little snot in high school, and there was a particular class. It was a history class, and I really didn't like the teacher. And I remember for one of the essays that we had to write, we had to describe some country. We got to choose the country, and man, I made up so much facts about this country. It was Brazil. It had man-eating ants. It had, I don't even remember everything I put in there. I made up sources, and I got an A, which didn't really raise my esteem for this teacher, my respect, because she didn't catch it. But I had fun doing that, and it was fun, even though it was really bad, also. But anyway.
And that, my friend, is why we love you. That's awesome. Now I'm wondering, did I ever read student work that was totally untrue? I'm like, oh, crikey.
Well, this was before widely available internet. So I think it might be a little bit easier to catch now if you went looking. But, at the time, you couldn't just Google a book and see if it was real or not.
Right. That's awesome.
But for our assignment today, I spoke some episodes ago about this character idea I had of, somebody who, for whatever reason, congenital or otherwise, wasn't able to join the link until like an advanced age, much older than typical. And so this character is not entirely comfortable with the link, because they spent more sort of formative time being alone in their own mind. So I think that that's a really interesting thing to explore. And so I went looking in my Zettelkasten for, something about like individualism or something along those lines. And I found a couple of cards that are really interesting that could add some more depth to this. And the first one was from Schumacher, E.F. Schumacher, in A Guide for the Perplexed, which I know I've mentioned him before. And I had a note that apprehending the inner experiences of others is impossible without first developing the inner experiences of oneself. And so I'm wondering how that would play out in a world where that's no longer true. Because if you're linked with other people, then you would immediately know the inner experiences of others without doing any work necessarily. Maybe that's how it works. We'll have to explore and find out. And then the other thing that I found, when I was looking for individuality, I found an index entry for the intrinsic value of aliveness, which came from the book Alone Together by Sherry Turkle, where I think this book is about 10 years old now, maybe a little bit more, but she was exploring sort of two sides of artificial intelligence as it was at the time, sort of how machines were becoming more intelligent, more alive seeming, at the same time as the internet and the experience of interacting with people on the internet were making people less human, more machine-like. So she was exploring sort of both sides of that question of, what does it mean to be alive? And she had given an example very early on in the book of taking her daughter to a Darwin exhibit, which had live Galapagos tortoises. A couple of them had been flown into this exhibit, and the tortoises were just sitting there, as tortoises do. And her daughter was like, why did they even bother bringing these tortoises all the way here? A robot could have done just as well. And she was just utterly shocked by her daughter saying this. And so she started asking the people in the line, because it was a long line, and many of the children agreed, yeah, why, cause so much trouble to the tortoises to bring them all this way? It's not doing anything for us. Why not have just robots? But then the parents that she talked to were like, the fact that they're alive is the whole point, right? And I had a whole line of responses to this, a whole bunch of cards, but the one that I think that is most interesting in this sort of constructed world that we're talking about, I said, let's see. The impression left by a wild animal free in its own environment is not the same as that animal captive. The captive animal is simply a representation of the experience in its native state, not the experience itself. Like, because, I tend to go with the kids. Like, why do we need to inconvenience the poor tortoises when, going to the Galapagos Island and seeing them in their native habitat, that would be a real experience of them, of how they are. Seeing them sitting in some pen in the middle of a museum, it's not really what they are. Photography or artwork or simulations of how they really are would be more effective, I think. And so I don't quite know how this is all going to fit in, but I feel like, with our games, with our constructed environment, with, it sort of being almost like a Disneyland to start with, obviously, that has grown and developed in its own way over the centuries. I think that these are some ideas that could be fun to play with.
Wow. Thank you. Very interesting.
Yes, very.
Wow. Okay. Well, Julianne?
Sure. Anytime the challenge is find a card that's in your system, I am prone to cheat. It is make a card that should have been in your system.
Awesome.
So I'm going to share my screen and show this card that should have been in my system, but I really only discovered it a week ago that it needed to be there, and I haven't developed the habits that I really want to develop using my Zettelkasten. But this, these weekly challenges are forcing me to, do something or get off the pot. So, what we're looking at is about a quasi art form called neurographica, which hit my radar, as things do, through my YouTube feed. I might be able to, I actually have one example of a really shallow neurographica art form, but I'll just do it with my hands. It's a way of drawing lines. Well, first of all, it's meant to be a psychological explorer transformative process. And so you begin by framing in your mind a challenge, a question that you have. You get yourself very calm, and then you draw very freely lines across a sheet of paper, and then you draw other lines just following your heart, and you cross those lines, and then a few more, and you create these intersections, and then there are some steps that you follow to round out the intersections and to find the shapes that you have created in there, and then you decorate it in certain ways. And the whole thing, this refers to a presentation by a woman. There are many people who present it. I really like hers. Her name is, she seems to be like, I don't know, her name is some sort of Scandinavian name. Anyway, I'll share the link to this, but it's Introduction to Neurographica, a Transformational Drawing Practice. So this is a link to that. And my question about this is, well, where are the limits? Are the limits, you have, if you're drawing with a Sharpie, then you've got this rather crude tool that you're drawing with. You're drawing on a flat piece of paper, so there's that. And just in kind of idly wondering about this, a character came up. And we can probably share the little story where I kind of hint at what she does for our people who follow us. We can share it in the Google Drive. But the character's name is Estelle, and she takes Neurographica beyond personal psychology, and this is an understatement. So actually the link between a character who might do this and the fact that, well, Neurographic ought to be in my Zettelcast, and it all kind of, I played catch up with myself. But the idea definitely formed as I was exploring this character named Estelle, that, oh, how might she do Neurographica?
Now I've got a whole new rabbit hole to go down.
Very, very interesting. Well, I guess it's on me now. I'll share my screen as well. Okay. So here's the card. Okay. And this card takes a concept of dimensionality that we are comfortable with in mathematics, and then it takes a simple logical syllogism and puts the two together. And it basically says, okay, the universe is good. Good always triumphs. In our dimensions, good does not always appear to triumph. Therefore, there must be higher dimensions such that taken as a whole, good triumphs. Mathematics demands this. And of course, there was a point in time in life where people would say, wait a minute, you can't invent higher dimensions. You don't have any right to pull those out of your hat. We have what we have. Well, then along came quantum physics, and along came string theory. And suddenly string theory, needed a few, like 17 or in the 20s. No problem. If the mathematics demands them, you get them. If string theory describes the universe and it requires extra dimensions, well, then the universe just must have those extra dimensions. And nobody seems to have any problem with it. So therefore, I'm comfortable with the universe is good. Good always triumphs. Therefore, we must have higher dimensions, since it does not appear to always triumph in our current dimensions. Now, the character that this brings to mind for me is a character who is somewhat simplistic in their statements or their pronouncements, a character who doesn't speak a whole lot, but appears to be perhaps on first impression seems to be one of the, shall we say, less gifted members of the community because of making statements that other people would say, humph, there's no reason to believe that. And yet still has a valuable contribution to make and might indeed be capable of some insights that others who are capable of more complex reasoning cannot see their way through because of all of the challenges. And along that line, I made a personal reflection card, which just occurred to me, because things pop into your mind when you're working with the Zettelkasten, and there's no way to keep that from happening, nor would you want to. But I thought about physics again. We have this basic law of conservation of energy. Energy can neither be created nor destroyed. Well, what about emotional energy? Can it be created or destroyed? What about, say, enthusiasm, for example? We already talk about whipping up enthusiasm. Isn't that creating energy? And we talk about dampening enthusiasm. Well, that's destroying energy. So how is it that emotional energy, psychic energy, can be created and can be destroyed? Is it then not subject to the laws of conservation of energy in the physical world? And then, is there any kind of limit to how much can be created? This becomes important because you're now dealing with links between the peoples. Let me stop sharing. This becomes important because you're now dealing with characters who have neural links to one another. And that means that they have unlimited ability to share their emotional energy with one another. And we all know what happened on Forbidden Planet. Creatures from the id. Could that be what happened to the colony? Okay, so thank you all for participating in that activity. And we also had a second activity in mind, which was, can you share a card from your Zettelkasten that when you went to place it, it performed a surprising connection, and share both the card and the card it connected to and where the surprise came in. Who would like to start us off? Oh, Deb again. Yay. You're muted.
Mute, Deb.
Yeah, they're cutting the grass outside, so I, didn't want that to interfere. I raised my hand because mine is the shortest. It doesn't exist. It doesn't exist at all. I spent most of my time, some of you may know, on a chart that I was working on this week. Yes, yeah. Thank you. So I don't have anything, but it was a great week, and I really enjoyed that activity. So, and it was given a push by this group, by this activity, by this story, by these requests. So, thank you.
Yeah, and thank you so much for your chart. Victoria and I mentioned it in our recording today for Fusion Writing, so it will be shared in our Tuesday episode. So you're about to become known for this incredible chart.
Oh, thank you. Good.
And we are hoping that you will be, among other things, a good recruitment tool for LilyPub, because people will want that chart, and that's where you posted it.
That's great. That's great. Okay, good.
Okay. Does someone else have a card that they want to share that offered a surprise? Okay, Mel.
Well, no, I have to follow along with Deb, and I'm going to explain why I don't have surprising cards yet. And that is because up until fairly recently, I was categorizing instead of finding connections. I've got ideas that should have gone together that got stuck into different categories because I'm like, oh, what is the higher level category of this particular card? And so, it was really only maybe 6 months ago at most that I really started to understand what you were saying about finding the most related card. And most of the things I've been working on since then have sort of been all of a piece with each other. So there haven't been too many anything that I think is particularly surprising yet. It will happen though, just not yet. So let that be a lesson to our viewers. Just don't categorize. Don't do it.
Okay. Thank you, Mel. That is an important lesson. It's the connections are what's important. The categories are just there to get you off the ground. When you've got an isolated card that just doesn't want to match with anything, then you go for a category. Okay, who has a card to share? All right, Victoria.
I have a card. Okay. So I was noodling around looking for something entirely different. And this is actually a card from the year 1848. And it's, as far as like modern definitive research goes, that's the year that we can tangibly trace back to when philosophy started to become weaponized. Blew my head off because I was like, wait a minute, what if? Because I'm looking for our antagonist and our antagonist by proxy, right? Because I'm thinking plot here. I'm totally thinking plot. You guys are going to take care of the rest. So I'm thinking, what if, given the nature of the link and the relationships that grow out of it and kind of how it manifests itself, what if we have an antagonist by proxy who weaponizes the Zettelkasten?
Oh.
Dun, dun, dun.
Oh.
Never would have occurred to me, but I thought if you can weaponize philosophy, why couldn't you weaponize the Zettelkasten?
Oh my.
Because we don't know who left these boxes or why. Just saying.
Definitely the plot thickens. Wow.
Yes.
It seems to me that might tie in with your, false information that's included in the Zettelkasten.
Right? Totally unintended.
Oh yeah.
I just pulled a card out of the box and I was like, okay, now we're going somewhere.
Awesome.
Okay.
I'll have to get out my mustachioed villain disguise.
Yeah. Okay.
All right, so I'll share a card that doesn't completely meet your brief, but it sort of does. So this card is one of the very first ones that I made from my own interests in my Zettelkasten just about a year ago. I don't think that you can see the memento that's on my wall that depicts this view. So Richard Bartle is a game designer, and he's written books on game design, and the kinds of games that he worked on were mostly text-based multi-user adventure games that are called MUDs, which stands for multi-user dungeon.
Oh.
And so he created an essay that was based on his observations of the and actually survey responses of some of the best players of these games, what they were looking for. And he found that there are 4 types of players, and you want to have a balance of these 4 types. It doesn't always need to be the same balance, but it needs to be balanced so that all these player types, who are real people, and none of them is a villain, can have the kind of fun that they like having. And so it uses these mnemonic devices of the suits of cards. So we've got the diamonds, who, when they're playing a game, the thing that they want is to win it.
Yeah.
And that's not really what everybody necessarily wants, right? So they want to win it. They want to be the best at it. They want to have the fastest score. They want to triumph always. The spades are interested above all in exploring the world. And if it takes winning something in order to get a new clue as to other things to explore, that's fine. The hearts are interested above all in social connection through the playing of the game with other people. And so they'll go about, they'll use these, each of these player types will use the other aspects of play as a means to achieving their ultimate goal. And then you've got the clubs who just like causing trouble.
That's Kathleen.
Victoria.
Wait, shots fired.
So this is a surprising connection for me because I think I've mentioned several times, I read a ton of books in 2021. I just followed my nose from one thing to another. And one of the first ones that I read was The Art of Game Design. And that book, plus a lot of other books, refers to this Bartle's player types. It's really an accepted part of the craft of designing games as of now. And so this just appealed to me, and I created this thing on my wall, and I read a bunch of other books, and now, and I didn't know why I was interested in reading about games. It was more like, why aren't I into games? I think I ought to be into games. Maybe if I came at it through the design, I would get into it. And so anyway, the surprising connection is this show.
Yeah.
Yep. A lot of advanced work you didn't even know you needed.
Yeah.
That's pretty amazing. Okay, well, I'll share my card. And where the surprise comes in is the surprise. So.
While Kathleen's getting set up, I'll just mention that's why I always tell students, follow your fascinations. You don't have to know why. As a writer or a creator, you don't have to know why. Just follow it and trust the process.
Okay.
Amen.
So this card is from Mortimer Adler, and it's understanding a book begins with coming to terms with the author. And this is, as you know, most people know that I did a whole series on how to read a book by Mortimer Adler. And I liked it so much that I even made a bib ring with all of his directions on how to actually go about doing that. So this card came out of that time period when I was working on all of these. And it's a very kind of prosaic card in a way, because if you think about it, if the author is using terms in a specific specialized way, and you want to understand what he's saying, you better know how he's using those terms. You better know what they mean. And you might be wise to actually note those terms and make a note of their definition so that you can refer back to it, so that you know you're reviewing them intentionally. Now, the card that this card picked to go with is this card. Sir Talanges always pops up in my stuff, in part because I had 23 bib cards, and it was one of the first books I ever Zettelcast in, and I made way too many notes, so he's all over the place. Okay, and this one says that we read great books to gain wisdom, not the acquisition of scattered truths. So when we're looking for wisdom, then this card chose this one because it's about understanding. But the real question comes in for me is, to what extent are we really talking about scattered truths when we're talking about the author's terms? So what is the missing ingredient that takes you from the scattered terms that an author is using to acquiring wisdom? And that led me to a question of what's the difference between understanding and getting wisdom? And is there any wisdom you can acquire without first having an understanding? And that led me back to another chapter in Adler's How to Read a Book, which I did not cover in my series, which is how to read fiction. And I was reminded of that by a post that Vanessa Sperling made over in Lilypub. And I thought, wow, that's right. I never focused in on that chapter at all. And then when you read that book, great fiction is included in great books. But yet Adler doesn't tell you to break down the characters. He doesn't tell you to break down the author's terms. His advice for reading a good story is to read it in as compact a time frame as you can imagine. If you can read it in 2 days, don't stretch it out over 2 weeks. Get your brain in it, read it, just dive in, forget yourself, forget your world, become totally immersed, turn the pages, go, 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 go. And just kind of like seep yourself in the juice of the book. Well, if it's a great fiction, and everyone says there's great fiction, no one would deny that. And if the purpose is to gain wisdom, and if we did not take any time to gain understanding, then maybe fiction is one of the best avenues for gaining wisdom, independent of understanding.
I love where you finally ended up. That's really great. I was like, where's she going with this?
Yeah. And of course that has to do with, and I'm trying to get this out of the way. I've got a screen in front of my face that won't go away. There we go. My point, of course, of this is that's what we're creating a fictional work.
Yeah.
So is the wisdom simply going to emerge, or are we going to plant it? And when great writers create works that impart great wisdom that are fiction, how did the wisdom get there?
I think you have to decide on what you mean by wisdom. A classicist would say what you're talking about is theme.
Mm-hmm.
So I think we have to agree on what do the terms mean. That's a perfect example of how your character trait terms are different technically than they are in common use. That's a fascinating question because there's a lot of answers in there depending on who you talk to.
Yeah. And if we want to create a work of great fiction, which in my view is that I believe that everyone has book in them. That's a common belief. That's not new to me by any means. But I think that everyone has a great work of fiction in them. And I believe that Lilypub is ideally suited to help even a beginning author create a great work of fiction that they have within them. And so if we're going to do that, then the work that we ourselves as members of Lilypub create, we should aspire to create a great work of fiction.
So I think that fiction is sort of a double-edged sword, though, because it isn't necessarily wisdom that it's imparting without, by bypassing the gates of knowledge. I mean, it can impart ideas that are bad ultimately. So, and I know an essayist, John Michael Greer, who writes mostly nonfiction, but he deliberately writes fiction sometimes as a way of encapsulating his ideas that he writes about in his nonfiction in a way that brings them to life, reaches an audience that's not going to follow the nonfiction argument, bypassing that sort of analytical part of the brain to go directly in. Now, I happen to like his ideas, but and I think that they are generally wisdom. But you can just as easily have fiction that gives people really bad ideas that don't fit the real world at all, or so it's a two-edged sword. It's extremely powerful, but what information you transmit, I guess, is whether it's wisdom or folly.
I think just in terms of the effectiveness of the transmission, I gotta think, Kathleen, the struggle is the storyteller. Because that's what, if we put the reader into the struggle with the character, they are summoning all sorts of energy in order to root for the character, to make the right choice, and all the things that they're doing, that they are imagining what the right choice would be if they're relating to it in a way that might just not leap off the page when you're reading an essay.
Yeah, I think as Mel put it, bypassing the analytical mind. Yeah. Yeah.
But I think it's a temporary bypass.
It can be temporary. If somebody, thinks about it afterwards and analyzes it afterwards, as I think all of us are prone to do. But,
right.
There's plenty of people who don't. They just take it in and it's just there. They don't even process it.
But they do that with television shows too, and movies.
Oh, absolutely.
Whatever.
Absolutely.
If somebody isn't going to think about what they consume, they won't think about whatever they consume. Yeah. Ooh. Well, we've reached the end of our scheduled programming. Who is going to lead us next week?
I can.
All right.
All right.
Look forward to it. So welcome back. And remember that lilypub.org is the place where you'll find the Roanoke Project, and you can sign up on our website to get a link to where we post documents that relate to what we're doing, so you can kind of follow along. But better yet is to join us in LilyPub, where you can actually participate in the discussion and let your views be known to us as we write. So we'd love to see you over in LilyPub, and check us out. See you next week.
Yes.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.